A homeless black girl rescues unconscious billionaire and his child washed ashore. Then, Juanita was waist-deep in the freezing waters of Crescent Bay, her thin arms straining as she pulled an unconscious man and his little girl toward the rocky shore. Rain hit her face in sharp bursts, her dark braids plastered to her skin. Her faded hoodie clung to her shivering body, heavy with seawater. The storm had weakened, but the waves still pushed and pulled against her, threatening to drag all three back under. The child clung tightly to her father, crying "Daddy," through the roar of the water. Juanita's bare feet scraped against sharp rocks as she fought for balance, every muscle burning. At last, she collapsed onto the sand, dragging them above the tide line. Gasping for air, she looked down at the man, his head bleeding, his chest rising faintly. She knew saving him could expose everything she had been hiding, everything she had fought to protect. But leaving him meant letting an innocent man die in front of his daughter. What would you risk to save a stranger's life, knowing it could cost you everything? Tell us where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow we'll share another powerful story you won't want to miss. Juanita woke before sunrise, her body stiff from the cool ground beneath the shelter of the live oaks near Crescent Bay. The small space she had claimed was hidden well, a tarp stretched between roots to block the damp air. She moved quietly, careful not to draw attention. Her backpack sat close by, packed with everything she owned: 2 changes of clothes, a second-hand biology textbook, a notebook filled with assignments, and a few photographs of her mother. She kept everything folded neatly, ready to leave at a moment's notice if someone discovered her. She slipped into her faded jeans and gray hoodie, clothes worn thin but clean. She brushed sand from her braids, tied them back, and stepped barefoot onto the cold ground. A pair of sneakers with frayed laces waited at the entrance. Pulling them on, she began her walk toward James Island County Park. That was where she could wash up before school, using the public restrooms to brush her teeth, wash her face, and change into the spare shirt she saved just for classes. Every morning carried the same quiet determination. Juanita knew that blending in at West Ashley High depended on arriving prepared, looking as though she lived like every other student. She had memorized the address of a friend's family, who let her use it for enrollment records. Without that, she would have been forced into foster care months ago. At school, she kept her head down but her grades up. Teachers admired her focus, though most assumed she had parents who pushed her to succeed. The truth was different. Her mother had been the one pushing her, long before illness drained the life from her. Juanita often thought back to the months when everything fell apart. Her mother, once full of energy, had been diagnosed with cancer. Medical bills stacked higher than rent. She worked until her body could no longer handle it, and soon eviction followed. They lost their apartment in North Charleston, carrying their belongings from shelter to shelter until even that became impossible. Juanita was 15 when her mother passed away in the middle of winter. The cold that night cut through her bones, but the deeper wound was the promise she made over her mother's hospital bed: to finish school, to keep going, no matter how difficult. Social workers tried to place her in the system, but Juanita refused. She feared losing the little control she had, feared being sent far from her school and the life she had built. Instead, she chose the harder road, living quietly on her own. She learned how to catch small fish along the marsh edges, how to stretch $1 from part-time jobs, how to stay invisible when she needed to. Despite hunger and exhaustion, she kept her grades among the highest in her class. Her teachers praised her discipline, unaware she often studied by flashlight in her shelter or by the dim glow of the library computers. She was not bitter. She carried hope, a quiet belief that if she kept working, something better waited ahead. That Friday morning began like all the others. After washing at the park, she boarded the bus to school, clutching her backpack tightly. Classes passed in a blur of assignments and lectures. At lunch, while others joked and shared meals, she sat with a small sandwich wrapped in foil, reading her biology notes. She wanted more than survival. She wanted to be ready for a future her mother believed she could have. By the final bell, storm warnings filled the air. Dark clouds rolled over Charleston, and the school announced after-school programs were canceled. Juanita headed to the public library. It was her safe space, a place where she could finish homework, stay warm, and feel for a few hours like any other student. She logged onto a computer, working through math problems and writing out an essay for history. Rain began tapping harder against the windows. The librarian announced early closure because of the storm. Juanita gathered her books and papers, sliding them carefully into her backpack. Stepping outside, she pulled her hoodie over her head, the air thick with wind and rain. Her plan was to reach her shelter before nightfall, but she knew the storm would make the journey difficult. Holding her belongings close, she walked quickly through the streets, her sneakers soaking through as puddles spread across the sidewalks. She reminded herself of her mother's voice, always steady, always firm, you keep moving forward. No matter how hard, you keep going. By late afternoon, Juanita reached Crescent Bay. Waves crashed louder than usual, white foam spraying into the air. She hurried beneath the live oaks where her shelter stood, grateful to see it still holding against the wind. She crawled inside, shivering as the storm raged outside. For a moment, she closed her eyes, listening to the roar of the ocean. She thought about her homework still unfinished, about the life she wanted beyond high school, about her mother's words. She had no way of knowing that within hours, the storm would bring two strangers into her world, strangers who would change her life forever. Gustavo Reyes believed in building things that lasted. At 50, he was known across the Southeast as the founder of Palmetto Ventures, a company that specialized in sustainable infrastructure. Bridges, energy systems, water projects. His company was behind some of the most ambitious developments in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. His success was often described in headlines, but the story started long before the boardrooms and contracts. Gustavo was the son of Cuban refugees. His parents arrived in Miami with little more than determination. His father worked construction, his mother cleaned houses, and together they instilled in him a belief that nothing was impossible if you worked hard enough. From his father, he inherited not only the discipline of labor but also a love for the sea. His earliest memories were of learning to handle a small sailboat in Biscayne Bay, the salt wind in his face, the calm strength in his father's voice teaching him how to read the currents. That bond with the ocean never left him. Even as his company grew into a billion-dollar force, Gustavo often returned to the water for clarity. The sea was where he felt most himself, away from the constant calls, emails, and meetings that demanded his attention. But success came with loss. 2 years earlier, his wife Camila had died after a long fight with cancer. They had been married for nearly 15 years. Her absence left a silence in the house no amount of business could fill. The only thing that kept him grounded was their daughter, Sophia. Sophia was 9 now, bright and curious, with her mother's smile and her father's stubborn will. To Gustavo, she was everything. He rearranged his life around her needs, and their sailing trips became sacred time, moments where it was only the two of them, no interruptions, no reminders of grief. He named the family sailboat Camila's Dream in honor of his wife, believing she would have wanted them to keep exploring the ocean together. That Friday morning in Charleston Harbor was perfect for sailing. The skies stretched clear and blue, the water calm enough to reflect the sunlight like glass. Gustavo and Sophia stood on the deck of Camila's Dream as the boat eased away from the marina. Sophia wore her favorite red life vest, clutching a small pair of binoculars she used to search for dolphins. Their plan was simple: follow the coast south, anchor overnight near a quiet inlet, and return by Saturday afternoon. Gustavo explained the route as he adjusted the sails, his voice calm, his movements precise. Sophia listened closely, eager to learn, repeating the terms her father taught her: port, starboard, stern. Gustavo watched her with pride. She carried the same determination he remembered from his father, the same eagerness to learn. Teaching her the old maritime traditions felt like passing on a piece of family history. He showed her how to handle the lines, how to feel the wind against her skin and know when the boat was catching the right direction. She laughed when he told her about his first mistake as a boy, capsizing in shallow waters and refusing to let go of the rope even as his father pulled him out. By midday, the sun was warm on their backs, and a steady breeze carried them smoothly along the South Carolina coast. Sophia sat at the bow, pointing excitedly at pelicans skimming the waves. Gustavo leaned back, letting himself feel the rare peace of being untethered from responsibility. The ocean had a way of stripping everything down to the essentials. It was just a father and daughter, the rhythm of the waves, and the quiet memory of a woman who had given them both love. For Gustavo, these hours were more than recreation. They were healing. Every laugh from Sophia reminded him that life still had joy. Every lesson on the boat was a step toward shaping the kind of young woman Camila would have wanted their daughter to become. In these moments, he was not the billionaire everyone else saw, he was simply a father. As the afternoon stretched on, he checked the weather one last time on his radio and phone. The forecast looked steady. He trusted his instincts and the sky above him, both telling him this was a good day for sailing. He had no reason to expect anything different. The horizon was calm, the sails full, and his daughter's voice carried on the wind as she shouted, "Daddy, look! Dolphins!" He smiled, lifting his binoculars to see them too, unaware that within hours the clear skies would give way to a storm more violent than anything he had faced on the water before. For now, though, Gustavo Reyes allowed himself to feel content. The ocean stretched wide, Sophia's laughter rang out, and Camila's dream carried them southward, steady and true. By late afternoon, the sky began to change. What had been a clear horizon in the morning grew heavy and gray around 4:30 p.m. An unpredicted low-pressure system moved quickly from the Gulf, pushing dark clouds ahead of it. The stillness of the ocean gave way to restless waves, first small, then climbing higher with every passing minute. Gustavo glanced at the instruments, frowning. The air pressure was dropping faster than it should. He scanned the sky. A line of clouds thickened across the west, swallowing the sun. The wind picked up, sharp and steady, forcing him to grip the tiller tighter. "Life jackets," he told Sophia calmly. She obeyed without hesitation, sliding hers on as her father tightened the straps. He adjusted his own, eyes locked on the horizon. His mind moved quickly, calculating their distance to the nearest safe harbor. Crescent Bay was the closest, but its shoals made it a dangerous entry point in bad conditions. Still, it was their only option. The storm did not wait. Within minutes, the calm surface became a battlefield of water. Waves rose 10 feet, then 15, hammering against Camila's dream. Gusts of wind tore at the sails, bending the mast until it groaned. Rain lashed down in sheets, blinding them, soaking through every layer of clothing. Gustavo's hands worked with precision, lowering the sails, starting the engine, trying to angle toward Crescent Bay. Each swell hit harder than the last, slamming the boat sideways. Sophia clung to the safety line, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she said nothing. Her trust in her father kept her steady. "Hold on to me," Gustavo shouted, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the storm. She obeyed, gripping his arm as he steered against the wind. Despite his years of sailing experience, Gustavo knew he was outmatched. This was no ordinary squall. The waves rose like walls, crashing over the deck, sweeping gear and ropes into the sea. Salt water stung his eyes. His muscles ached from fighting the wheel. The shoals near Crescent Bay loomed ahead, their jagged rocks hidden beneath the furious surf. One miscalculation could tear the hull apart. He pushed the engine to full, praying they could clear the rocks and make it to shallow water. But the storm had other plans. A wave larger than the rest struck the side of Camila's dream with crushing force. The boat tilted sharply, water pouring across the deck. Gustavo shouted for Sophia to hold tight, but the next swell rose higher, slamming into them before they could recover. With a violent crack, the mast snapped. The boat lurched, rolling helplessly as another wave pounded into its side. In seconds, Camila's dream flipped, throwing father and daughter into the churning waters. The shock of the cold water stole Sophia's breath. She screamed, reaching for her father. Gustavo's instincts took over. He grabbed her, wrapping her in both arms, kicking hard to keep them above the surface. The overturned boat drifted away, swallowed by the storm. Waves crashed over them, dragging them under, spitting them back up. Sophia's small arms clutched his neck, sobbing into his shoulder. Gustavo held her tighter, shielding her from debris that whipped past them in the water. "Don't let go," he whispered, though his own lungs burned. Every muscle in his body fought to stay afloat, to keep her head above the surface even as waves rose higher than houses around them. Through the chaos, a piece of floating wreckage struck them hard. Pain exploded at the side of Gustavo's head. His vision blurred, the roar of the storm muffled. He tightened his grip around Sophia one last time, instincts overriding failing strength. He wrapped her against a broken panel of wood, his arms locked around her, unwilling to release. Darkness rushed in. His last thought was not of the storm, nor the sea, but of his daughter, her safety, her future, her life beyond this moment. The waves carried them relentlessly toward Crescent Bay. Sophia, still wrapped in her father's arms, sobbed against his chest as the storm surge pushed them closer to land. Each swell brought them nearer to the shore, though neither could see it through the sheets of rain and foam. By the time they reached the shallow edge of the bay, Gustavo was unconscious, his body limp but his arms still locked in place around his daughter. The storm's fury drove them onto the sand and rocks, leaving them battered, soaked, and barely alive, two fragile figures carried by the ocean toward a fate neither could have expected. By 6 o'clock that evening, Juanita had taken shelter beneath the narrow overhang of the bait shop near Crescent Bay. The storm still battered the coast, though its worst had begun to move north. Sheets of rain swept sideways, soaking her legs, and the wind carried salt spray that stung her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to stay warm. Through the gray haze of water and mist, she caught sight of something rolling in with the waves. At first it looked like more wreckage, broken wood tossed around by the tide. But as her eyes focused, her chest tightened. It wasn't debris. It was two bodies. Her breath hitched. She pressed a hand to her mouth, frozen. Every instinct told her to stay back. If she went to them, someone might find out about her, about where she was living, about the life she'd worked so carefully to keep hidden. If she stayed put, the storm would wash them away, and no one would know she'd been here at all. But the thought of walking away burned in her chest. She heard her mother's voice, as clearly as if she were still beside her. "We help people because it's right, not because it's easy." Juanita stood, her sneakers slipping on wet sand. She kicked them off, tossed her hoodie to the ground, and waded into the icy water. The first rush of the surf nearly knocked her back. The current pulled hard, her legs trembling as she pushed forward. The child was closest. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, her arms locked around an older man's body, clinging with desperate strength. Her cries carried through the storm, thin but sharp. Juanita pushed toward her, calling out, "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe now." The girl's eyes met hers, wide and terrified. "Help my dad," she sobbed, coughing as water splashed over her face. Juanita reached her, wrapping an arm around the girl's waist. "I've got you. Hold on to me." She dragged her toward the shallows, staggering as the waves slammed against them. Each step was a fight, but the girl's grip steadied her. Together they stumbled back until Juanita could set her on wet sand beyond the tide's reach. She crouched low, brushing the girl's hair from her face. "Stay right here. I'm going for your dad." The girl nodded, teeth chattering, too exhausted to argue. Juanita turned back. The man floated farther out, his body limp, his head rolling with the pull of the water. Her heart pounded. This would be harder. She forced herself forward again, diving into the surf until she could reach his arm. He was heavy, dead weight, unmoving. She wrapped both arms around his chest, heaved with all her strength, and let the waves push them toward shore while she angled against the current. Years of studying the bay had taught her where the breaks in the rocks gave the easiest passage. She kicked hard in that direction, gasping with the effort. Every muscle burned. Salt water filled her mouth, stung her eyes. For a moment she thought she would lose him, but she locked her jaw and refused to let go. 20 minutes passed in a blur of struggle, her dragging, waves resisting, his weight pulling her under. She clawed against the tide until finally, her feet touched sand. With a final heave, she pulled him up the beach to where the girl waited, shivering. Juanita collapsed beside them, her chest heaving. The man lay motionless. Blood streaked from a cut near his hairline, mixing with the rain. His face was pale, lips blue at the edges. She pressed her ear close to his mouth. A faint breath touched her cheek. He was alive. Relief washed through her, but it was thin comfort. He needed more than she could give. Quickly, she rolled him onto his side, tilting his head back the way she'd once learned in a first aid demonstration at school. His chest rose and fell shallowly, but at least the airway was clear. The girl crawled close, clutching her father's hand. "Don't let him die," she whispered. Juanita swallowed hard, brushing the child's shoulder gently. "I won't. I promise. But I need to get help." Her mind raced. The nearest place she could reach was the convenience store half a mile up the beach road. Someone there could call an ambulance. She squeezed the girl's hand. "Stay right here with him. Keep talking to him so he knows you're close. I'll be back as fast as I can." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, clutching her father tightly. Juanita pushed herself to her feet, barefoot now, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She gave one last glance at the man lying in the sand, the child curled against him, before sprinting up the beach into the rain, every step pounding with urgency. Red and blue lights flashed across the wet sand as the rescue vehicles pulled up near Crescent Bay. Paramedics rushed forward, their boots sinking into the soaked shoreline, while Coast Guard personnel carried emergency gear from their truck. The storm had finally loosened its grip, leaving the beach scattered with broken branches, plastic crates, and pieces of boat hull. Juanita stood shivering, arms crossed tightly against her chest, water still dripping from her clothes. Her thin frame trembled from exhaustion and cold, but she stayed near the unconscious man and his daughter. The girl clung to her father's arm, unwilling to let go, tears cutting lines down her salt-streaked face. A paramedic knelt beside Gustavo, checking his pulse, then called for a stretcher. "Head trauma, possible concussion, hypothermia," he shouted to his team. They lifted him carefully, strapping him down as another medic covered him with thermal blankets. Sophia tried to follow onto the stretcher, but another paramedic gently pulled her aside, wrapping her in a blanket of her own. "She's stable," the medic said. "Bruises, shock, but no major injuries." Sophia's wide eyes searched for Juanita, and when she found her, she reached out. Juanita stepped closer, crouching beside her, squeezing her hand to reassure her. It was only then that one of the paramedics, a tall man with sharp eyes, noticed Juanita's condition. Her jeans were torn at the knees, her hoodie soaked and stretched from years of wear. She had no shoes on, her bare feet cut and raw from the rocks. Her hands were rough, the nails chipped. She didn't look like someone out for an evening stroll. "Miss," he said carefully, "we'll need your information for the report. Can I get your address?" Juanita froze. The words stuck in her throat. She shifted on her feet, buying time. The medic looked at her expectantly, pen hovering above his clipboard. Her silence was enough to draw attention. A police officer walked over, her raincoat slick with water, her badge reflecting in the flashing lights. Officer Patricia Green crouched to meet Juanita's eyes. Her tone was steady, gentle, but firm. "You saved 2 lives tonight. We're grateful. But I need to know where you live, sweetheart. Where can we take you after this?" Juanita dropped her gaze to the sand. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't have a place." The officer tilted her head slightly. "No guardian? No family?" Juanita shook her head, her braids falling forward. Her throat burned as she forced the words out. "My mom. She died last winter. I've been on my own since." The officer's face softened. She placed a hand lightly on Juanita's shoulder. "How old are you?" 17. That was enough. Patricia exhaled slowly. Protocol was clear. A minor without a guardian had to be reported to the Department of Social Services. Emergency foster placement was the standard procedure. But standing here, looking at the girl who had risked everything to drag two strangers from the ocean, Patricia knew this wasn't a simple case. She stepped aside, pulling out her phone, making calls, to supervisors, to DSS contacts. She pressed the urgency of the situation. This wasn't just another teenager in crisis. This was someone who had proven herself capable, resilient, extraordinary under pressure. She deserved more than being shuffled into a system that might erase everything she had fought to keep. Juanita watched uneasily as the officer paced with the phone pressed to her ear. She felt exposed, stripped of the careful secrecy she had built to survive. Her shelter beneath the live oaks, her routine at the park showers, her borrowed address to stay in school, all of it could come crashing down now. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard finished gathering statements. Witnesses confirmed the rescue. A teenage girl had pulled a grown man and his daughter from the surf during the storm. The paramedics logged their medical findings: concussion, hypothermia, lacerations for the father, bruising and emotional shock for the daughter. The report would be forwarded to the hospital and eventually to the press. By the time Gustavo and Sofia were loaded into the ambulance, news had already spread across radios. A local scanner operator posted the incident online: homeless teen rescues prominent businessman and child at Crescent Bay. Within hours, the story would grow wings. Juanita remained on the beach, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, sitting on the bumper of a patrol vehicle. Her body still ached from the rescue, her arms trembling from fatigue. A medic brought her warm water and checked her pulse. Officer Green finally returned, crouching again to meet her eye level. "I've spoken to my supervisor. We're going to place you somewhere safe tonight. Not a shelter, not a group home. Something temporary until we can sort this out. You have my word." Juanita nodded slowly, her chest tight. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but tonight she had no strength left to fight. The ambulance doors slammed shut, carrying Gustavo and Sofia toward MUSC Health in downtown Charleston. Doctors there would work through the night, stitching the laceration on his head, warming his body from the chill of the water, treating his concussion. Sofia would be examined too, her minor injuries catalogued, though her greatest wound was invisible: the fear of losing her father. Back on the beach, Officer Green escorted Juanita into her cruiser. Through the rain-streaked window, Juanita watched the flashing lights fade into the distance. For the first time in months, she wasn't planning where to sleep or how to stay hidden. Her secret was gone, exposed under the harsh glow of emergency lights. She closed her eyes, her mother's words echoing again: "We help people because it's right, not because it's easy." What Juanita couldn't know yet was that her choice to act had set in motion something far larger than herself. Reporters would soon be calling. Cameras would arrive. And the lives of three strangers, thrown together by a storm, would never be the same. The first light of morning slipped through the blinds of a hospital room at MUSC Health. Machines hummed softly, monitoring the steady but fragile recovery of Gustavo Reyes. His chest rose and fell under warm blankets, the traces of seawater long washed away by the work of doctors through the night. A bandage circled his head where the cut had been stitched. His skin still held a faint chill, but his body was fighting back. His eyelids fluttered open, pupils adjusting to the brightness. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. He didn't know where he was or how he had gotten here. But one word formed on his lips before anything else: Sofia. His voice cracked, rough and low. The attending nurse leaned over quickly, placing a calming hand on his arm. "She's safe," she said gently. "She's right here." On the recliner next to his bed, Curled beneath a hospital blanket, Sophia slept soundly. Tear streaks stained her cheeks, but her breathing was calm now. Someone had placed her tiny hand in his, and though unconscious, Gustavo's grip had never released hers. Relief rushed through him, loosening the tension in his chest. He exhaled shakily, eyes wet with gratitude. But almost immediately, another question pushed forward. He tightened his hold on the nurse's hand. "The girl, the one who saved us. Where is she?" The nurse hesitated, exchanging a glance with a doctor standing at the foot of the bed. "You need to rest," the doctor urged. "You've been through significant trauma. Head injury, hypothermia. Let's focus on stabilizing you first." But Gustavo shook his head, his voice firmer this time. "No. I need to know about her." Over the next hours, details began to filter in. Coast Guard investigators came to the hospital to confirm what they knew. The boat had capsized near Crescent Bay during an unpredicted squall. Gustavo had shielded his daughter until he lost consciousness. A local teenager, barely more than a child herself, had pulled them from the water against impossible odds. Doctors filled in the medical side. Without Juanita's intervention, both father and daughter would almost certainly have drowned before rescue teams arrived. Finally, it was Sophia who gave the clearest picture. When she woke and saw her father sitting upright, her sobs filled the room. She threw herself against him, trembling in his arms. Between tears, she told him about the girl who had pulled them from the waves. "She wasn't scared, Daddy. Not even when I was crying. She held my hand and said she wouldn't leave us. She promised." Sophia's voice broke as she buried her face against his chest. "She saved you. She saved me." Gustavo's throat tightened. Each word carved itself into him. He asked more questions, pressing for details. And as the story unfolded, he learned something that stopped him cold. The girl who had carried them from the sea had no home to return to. She was 17, living alone, surviving in secret. The reality shook him. He couldn't comprehend it. Someone with nothing had risked everything to save his family. By the following day, Officer Patricia Green visited the hospital to check on Sophia and Gustavo. She confirmed what he had heard: Juanita's homelessness, her resourcefulness, her refusal to enter the foster system even after her mother's death. "She's strong, Mr. Reyes," Green said quietly. "Stronger than most adults I know. But she's been alone too long." Gustavo didn't hesitate. "I need to meet her." Green nodded. "She's in temporary care right now, while the Department of Social Services reviews her case. But I'll arrange it." 3 days later, Gustavo was well enough to sit upright in a private waiting room at the hospital. His head still throbbed, but his resolve was stronger than ever. Sophia sat beside him, fidgeting with the edge of her dress, her small face lit with anticipation. The door opened. Juanita stepped in hesitantly, her posture tense, her eyes darting between the adults in the room. She wore borrowed clothes, a clean shirt and jeans provided by social services, but her guarded expression remained unchanged. Before she could say a word, Sophia leapt from her chair and ran across the room, wrapping her arms around her waist. "You came!" she cried, clinging tightly. Juanita stiffened at first, then relaxed, hugging her back with a small, uncertain smile. Gustavo stood, his movements slow but steady. He approached, emotion swelling in his chest as he looked at the girl who had carried him through a storm. He opened his arms. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, voice heavy with feeling. Juanita lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "You don't have to. I just did what anyone should." "No," he replied firmly, lifting her chin so she could see the conviction in his eyes. "Not anyone would. Many would have walked away. You didn't. You risked your life for me and my daughter. That means everything." Tears glistened in his eyes as he drew her into a careful embrace. Juanita remained stiff for a moment before letting herself rest in the unfamiliar comfort. Sophia joined them, wrapping her small arms around both. When they sat again, Gustavo leaned forward, his tone steady. "Juanita, I don't want to offer you charity. That's not what this is. What I want is to honor the strength you've already shown. You deserve a chance at a future worthy of who you are." Juanita shifted uneasily. "I don't know what that means." "It means stability," Gustavo said gently. "A place where you can focus on school without worrying where you'll sleep. A chance to graduate, to pursue whatever you dream of. I want to help make that possible, not because I owe you, but because you've shown me the kind of courage and character I deeply respect." Officer Green, who had been watching quietly, added her support. "There are legal paths to make this happen, Juanita. Guardianship, sponsorship, educational support. Nothing would move forward without your consent. But you should know you've already earned the trust and admiration of everyone here." Juanita looked down at her hands, her throat tight. For so long, survival had meant hiding. Depending on someone else felt like giving up control. Yet here was this man, someone she had saved without knowing his name, offering not pity, but partnership. Sophia squeezed her hand with a hopeful smile. "Please say yes. I want you with us." Juanita's eyes welled. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I'll think about it." Gustavo nodded with respect. "That's all I ask." In that quiet hospital room, something shifted. The bond between them was no longer about rescue alone. It was about recognition, of worth, of courage, of the possibility of a future rewritten together. The legal process moved faster than anyone expected, though not because it was easy. Social services had their protocols, and the courts had their rules. But when Gustavo Reyes decided something mattered, he committed to it fully. His attorneys worked hand in hand with Officer Green and the Department of Social Services to ensure Juanita's guardianship was handled the right way, no shortcuts, no gray areas. Every form, every signature, every court appearance underscored his determination that she would never again be left without stability. Juanita sat through meetings she barely understood at first, surrounded by adults using words like petition, jurisdiction, and guardianship order. But each time, Gustavo explained things in simple terms. "This is about making sure you have a foundation that no one can take from you," he told her. "It's not charity. It's permanence." By the end of the month, the paperwork was finalized. Juanita Reyes, as the documents now named her, had a guardian who was not just wealthy, but present. She moved into the guest house on Gustavo's rented property in Charleston's historic district, a restored carriage house tucked behind iron gates and magnolia trees. The building was modest compared to the main home, but for Juanita, it was more than enough. She had her own bed with clean sheets, a bathroom stocked with towels, and a kitchen where food didn't come from cans stacked in a backpack. For the first time in years, she slept without listening for footsteps or worrying about being asked to leave. Gustavo insisted she stay enrolled at West Ashley High School. "Your education is yours," he reminded her. "Nothing changes that." But now, instead of slipping into class after a night on the streets, she arrived rested, fed, and with a backpack that didn't double as her closet. Life settled into rhythms she had almost forgotten could exist. Breakfast at the kitchen table. Evenings helping Sophia with her reading. Sundays spent walking through Waterfront Park or sailing short routes in Charleston Harbor. There was laughter in the house now, sometimes Sophia's shrieks of delight, sometimes Juanita's quiet chuckle when the family's adopted cat climbed into her lap without invitation. But beyond their walls, the story had already spread. The Charleston Post and Courier was the first to run it. Homeless teen rescues billionaire and daughter in coastal storm. Within a week, the headline reached national outlets. Television crews gathered outside the hospital. Journalists dug for details. Gustavo managed the attention with care. He knew how ruthless the media could be, and Juanita's privacy was non-negotiable. No cameras at the school. No direct interviews. "She's a young woman, not a headline," he told reporters firmly. What he did allow was a single carefully framed conversation with a post and courier. Sitting in a quiet office overlooking the harbor, he spoke calmly but with conviction. "We live in a world that measures people by what they own," he told the reporter. "But if you want to understand character, look at what people choose to do when no one is watching. A young woman with nothing risked everything to save me and my daughter. Courage and compassion have nothing to do with bank accounts. They live in the choices we make." The article struck a chord. Across the country, readers shared it not because it was sensational, but because it reminded them of something simple: dignity isn't measured in wealth. For Juanita, the sudden attention was disorienting. Teachers congratulated her in hallways. Strangers recognized her face when she ran errands. For someone who had spent years trying to remain unseen, being visible felt unnatural. But home became her anchor. Sophia adored her, trailing behind her like a shadow. At night, when nightmares about the storm woke the little girl, it was often Juanita who calmed her first, whispering promises until she fell back asleep. Their bond grew closer than sisters, sometimes playful, sometimes protective. At school, Juanita's grades soared. With stability behind her, the hours she once spent worrying about food or shelter now went into textbooks and assignments. By spring, she was not only passing every class but excelling. Teachers pushed her into advanced courses. Guidance counselors began talking about scholarships. By her senior year, she stood as salutatorian, her speech at graduation filled with quiet pride. That summer, Gustavo offered her a position at Palmetto Ventures' Charleston office. It was entry-level filing reports, helping with data, but she treated it with the same discipline she had shown in school. What surprised everyone was how quickly she found herself drawn to the environmental science division. She asked questions about sustainable building, carbon reduction, and coastal resilience. Senior engineers noticed her sharp mind. By August, Gustavo had no doubt. Her future was waiting in the very field his company had pioneered. For Gustavo himself, the rescue and everything that followed marked a turning point. He had always been aware of his good fortune, but Juanita's story forced him to confront the harsh realities of poverty in a personal way. He had once believed resilience was about boardrooms and market risks. Now he knew it was about surviving nights in the cold, showing up to school without a home, and still having the heart to save strangers from the sea. He called a meeting of his executive team and made an announcement that startled even his closest advisors. Palmetto Ventures would launch a new hiring initiative, positions reserved for individuals experiencing homelessness, complete with housing stipends, mentorship, and on-the-job training. "We're not giving handouts," he explained. "We're giving opportunities to people who've already proven they can endure more than most of us ever will." The program drew national praise, but Gustavo insisted it wasn't about reputation. It was about responsibility. For Juanita, life remained both wonderful and challenging. She still wrestled with trust, with the fear that everything might disappear again. She sometimes flinched at loud voices or struggled with the idea of permanence. But each day in her new home, with Gustavo's steady encouragement and Sophia's unwavering affection, she built something she had never dared hope for: a future. By the time she walked across the stage at graduation, her family in the front row cheering, Juanita no longer thought of herself as a girl hiding in shadows. She was a young woman stepping into the light, ready to claim the life she had fought so hard to reach. 6 months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt natural, even though none of them would have believed it possible on that storm-tossed night by Crescent Bay. The routines of family life, shared breakfasts, arguments over homework, evenings spent on the porch with the sound of cicadas humming in the background, were no longer fragile miracles, but everyday realities. Juanita stood in her cap and gown under the hot South Carolina sun, the tassel brushing against her cheek as she waited for her name to be called. When it finally echoed across the loudspeakers, she walked with steady steps to the stage. In the crowd, Gustavo and Sophia rose to their feet, clapping until their palms stung, tears cutting down their faces. For Gustavo, it wasn't just pride, it was relief. Relief that the girl who once slept under tarps and counted every meal was now collecting college acceptance letters like badges of honor. Juanita held her diploma tightly, her heart racing. Only a year ago she'd sat on the edge of Crescent Bay with a second-hand textbook, convincing herself her life could be different if she worked hard enough. Now she was living proof that hope wasn't wasted, that survival could be more than endurance. It could be the start of something extraordinary. For Sophia, the months with Juanita had brought something she hadn't realized she'd been missing since her mother's passing: consistency. Grief had left holes in her days, gaps that no amount of wealth or caretakers could fill. But Juanita's presence, her patience, her ability to listen, her quiet strength, helped stitch those gaps closed. In her, Sophia had found not just a friend but the kind of sister she thought she'd never have. The world outside their household hadn't forgotten either. News stories still referenced the Charleston rescue, but the focus had shifted. It wasn't about sensational headlines anymore. It was about the larger questions raised by Juanita's journey. Across the country, conversations about youth homelessness took on new urgency. Church groups, schools, and nonprofits cited her story as evidence of what resilience looked like when given the chance to grow. Preconceptions began to crack. People who once thought of homelessness only in terms of statistics began to see the faces behind those numbers. Students balancing school with survival, teenagers showing up to class despite exhaustion, young people with dreams no different from anyone else's. Juanita had forced society to confront not just the hardships of poverty, but also the strength, determination, and courage that often went unseen. For Gustavo, reflection came in quiet moments. He had been a man living in motion, steering an empire of sustainable infrastructure while moving through his days without fully feeling them. Since losing Camila, he'd gone through routines like a ship drifting without wind. But that storm had shaken more than his body. It had cracked open his soul. He often replayed that night, not just the terror of the storm but the choice Juanita made. A teenager with nothing to lose but her own fragile stability had stepped into freezing waters and pulled him and his daughter back to life. In his heart he knew the truth. The rescue had saved 3 lives that day, his, Sophia's, and his own. Standing at Juanita's graduation, Gustavo realized he was no longer a man defined only by boardrooms and loss. He was part of a family remade by courage. He had wealth, yes, but what mattered now were the bonds that money couldn't buy: trust, love, the simple act of showing up for one another every day. The lesson was clear. Circumstances never defined worth. Heroism wasn't found in headlines or grand gestures, but in small, decisive acts of kindness and bravery. True generosity wasn't about handing out favors while maintaining power. It was about seeing another person's dignity and honoring it as equal to your own. Crescent Bay carried on as it always had, waves rolling in and out, the tide washing over the rocks that had once nearly claimed them. To strangers it was just another stretch of coastline, but to Gustavo, Juanita, and Sophia, it was sacred ground. On the anniversary of the storm, they returned together. The 3 of them stood side by side, watching the Atlantic's endless movement. Sophia slipped her hand into Juanita's, and Juanita rested her other hand on Gustavo's arm. No speeches were made. No explanations were needed. They were not bound by blood, but by something stronger: the choice to see each other's worth and to build a life from it. As the sun dipped low, casting the horizon in shades of orange and gold, their story settled into its place. Not a tale of wealth meeting poverty, not a story of loss and rescue, but a testament to the best of what people can be when they act out of simple conviction. The truth was plain: the strength of America had never rested in its richest towers or grandest institutions. It had always been carried in the hands of ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply because it was right. Thank you for joining us in this journey. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We love hearing your stories. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story we'll be sharing. Your support makes it possible for us to keep bringing these meaningful narratives to light. And tomorrow, we have another story you won't want to miss.